Hi, I'm Loanne Halden, Vice President of Communications for IGLTA, the International LGBTQ+ Travel Association, the global leader in advancing LGBTQ+ travel. Since 1983, we've been connecting LGBTQ+ welcoming businesses around the world, helping to improve the landscape for our community of travelers. I first fell in love with Africa on my very first visit 24 years ago and have returned a few more times over the subsequent years. But as much as I remember my first safari, my first look at Victoria Falls, standing at the tip of the continent, I also remember being told by a guide to keep my sexual orientation to myself. It didn't ruin the trip, but it did stay with me all these years. And that's why I'm so proud to work for an organization that is dedicated to increasing understanding of LGBTQ+ travelers so that we can experience all the beauty that Africa and the world has to offer while still feeling safe and welcome. That's also why I'm proud that IGLTA is part of the Africa Travel Week journey under the Equal Africa banner to bring more diversity and inclusion to this week of travel, business meetings, and education. IGLTA has an incredible network of global members, destinations, airlines, hotels, travel advisors, tour operators, media, and marketing experts. And we've tapped into their experience to share best practices for working with and supporting the LGBTQ+ travel market. Today's session, Insights to Help Track LGBTQ+ Travelers, is presented by longtime IGLTA member Community Marketing Insights, which has conducted LGBTQ+ consumer research for over 25 years. Thomas Roth and David Paisley have been incredible partners to IGLTA, never hesitating to share their expertise with our network. They truly believe in the power of collaboration, and so I'm delighted to introduce them today to ATW Virtual. Sit back, relax, and get ready to let go of stereotypes as they outline strategies that will help you successfully engage with LGBTQ+ travelers. We hope that one day soon, your business will also be a part of IGLTA's welcoming network.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation on research insights to help you attract LGBTQ travelers. This is a unique style of presentation because it's based on a lot of data that we've collected over the many years, looking at the trends and the preferences and the motivations of LGBTQ travelers. So we hope that you learn a lot and can apply it to your own work. I want to thank Africa Travel Week, especially for the fact that you have a diversity and inclusion track. I also want to thank IGLTA. Both of you together are really opening doors in Africa and to Africa from the world. So we really appreciate your work and thank you very much for hosting us. I want to briefly introduce my company, my team. I'm Tom Roth. I'm the founder and president of Community Marketing, Inc. I started the company back in 1992 when very few people were actually traveling out and proud as an LGBTQ traveler. But that's changed a lot as destinations have opened up, conferences have focused on this topic, like the Africa Travel Week, and things have really changed a lot, and we're really proud to be part of that change. Lu Jun is in Shanghai, so unfortunately she's in a very different time zone and unable to join us today, but she's with us in spirit. And I'll let David introduce himself.
Great. And my name is David Paisley. I'm the Senior Research Director at Community Marketing Insights. I've actually been here for over 20 years. And one thing we'll really emphasize in this particular presentation is that there's no just one LGBTQ market. We are a very diverse and vast market, and we all have very different interests in our travel. So for instance, for me, I'm very much an outdoor adventure traveler. When I travel with my husband to many, many different national parks and those types of settings, but that's not true for everyone in our community. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. And also just to say that I have been to Africa. I've been to South Africa a few years ago when I was a little bit younger, but I had a great experience touring many different parts of South Africa.
And my history, this is Tom again, dates back to 1984. My first visit to Africa was on request by an invitation in Sierra Leone and Liberia to come there and teach meditation to students to help them with their academic performance. And this is a picture of me presenting our program to Shaka Stevens, who at the time was the president of Sierra Leone. That was a fantastic experience. I lived in Sierra Leone for about 3 months, and it gave me an opportunity to get to know neighbors and get to know the community. I would say my first experience of Africa really gave me segue to enjoying Africa many times. One of my most recent trips to Africa was South Africa with the IGLTA convention. I took a couple extra days and did some cycling. You see me there cycling on Table Mountain. And I also did a road ride from over in the Stellenbosch area. And I love this sign to beware of the baboons. We don't see that much in California when I go cycling. This is tied into another IGLTA convention. There was a convention several years ago in Madrid, and I looked at a map and I said, okay, I want to do an extended trip, and what's kind of within flying distance that I can extend to, and I picked Morocco. And so I did a cycling trip there and a walking tour, and really enjoyed my short visit to Morocco, and I'm sure I'll go back. And most recently, I visited, I'll show you in a second, I did a camping safari in the Chobe National Park region, but I did 2 stopovers on my way to get there. I make my travel very efficient, and I really try and pull in a lot of experiences and culture. So I was able to stop in Cairo and tour the area there. And next, Dave. And then I ended up in Arusha. And in Arusha, I was able to go and experience the many national parks of Tanzania, partially by bicycle. Bicycle, you'll see, is kind of a theme of my travels. It's a great way for me to get out and explore and smell the smells and interact with the local people, and really just totally enjoy that. Next. And from there, I went on to the Ngorongoro crater and the national parks of Tanzania, and really enjoyed that. It's quite a beautiful experience. If the participants haven't had a chance to explore your continent much, I would say get out there. It's spectacular, really moving experience. And after that, I flew on to Zanzibar. I did a cycle tour in Zanzibar. What a fantastic experience as well. So yeah, I've had an opportunity to experience a lot of flavors of Africa and really have become quite the fan, which makes me even more enthusiastic about doing this presentation today. And just a couple more. I was in Durban to speak at Indaba, and at Indaba, I took a couple extra days. I did a cycle tour. This one included a park that you can actually cycle through with the animals. So I had a chance to experience them up close and personal via my bicycle. I also took a side trip up to Lesotho from there. And then when I went to onward from Cairo and Addis Ababa, I went down to Vic Falls. I did a bike tour that included riding over the Victoria Falls Bridge and entering Zambia and then back into Zimbabwe and experiencing the Victoria Falls. Really spectacular area. And then finished up that trip in the world's only quadrupoint. I'm not sure if you're aware, maybe you are. There's only one spot on Earth that is a quadrupoint where 4 countries meet at the same spot: Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. And so in that area is the Chobe National Park, where I got to do, Dave, a camping safari. And yes, camping in that little tent and hearing lions roaring in the middle of the night is both exhilarating and and frightening, but I loved it. It was such a great way to experience that corner of Africa. So with all that combined, yes, I would say I'm quite a fan. So enough about me and my adventures in Africa. Let me tell you a little bit about the company, and then I'll turn it over to Dave to share some of the research with you. So as I mentioned, we started in 1992. Back then, very few companies were interested in the LGBTQ market. The first industry that got engaged with LGBT community was the tourism industry. So our first clients back in 1992 were in travel and hospitality. And we grew our business from there. We're a fully 100% LGBTQ owned and operated NGLCC certified supplier. And over the past 28 years, we've done an enormous amount of consumer research and research projects across many industries, not just travel, but with a big focus on travel. And we do our research based on our own panel, which is a database of about 50,000 LGBTQ consumers in North America. And based on that, we get samples across the spectrum that really is LGBTQ. And we serve a wide variety of clients and organizations. Some of our tourism clients include countries on many continents, include many DMOs, the destination management organizations, and visitors bureaus across North America and Canada. And through this experience, we've really gained what I would call a knowledge base of LGBTQ tourism that's really kind of unmatched in the world based on research and experience of these destinations and working with these destinations. Every one of them is unique, and every one of you sitting in the session today is unique. And so our research presentation will hopefully help you identify some of the best opportunities for you to explore this marketplace. Dave? So our research today is based on 4 studies, and we're going to make those studies available to all of you. Our annual LGBT tourism survey, tourism and hospitality survey. Then since COVID hit, we've done 2 updates. We did one in May and one in October 2020. And those gave us real perspectives on how COVID has influenced travel and the desire for future travel, which I think you'll find really interesting. And also our annual LGBTQ community survey. So all of those are available for free on our website, and I'll share the link again with you at the end. But also new on our website, I think could be particularly interesting is the Black LGBTQ community survey, because I believe that the Black LGBTQ community, if invited, would really enjoy an LGBT experience of traveling in Africa. And Dave? So what we're going to cover today, just 3 points. What is the quote LGBTQ community? Because there are many ways to define it and understand it. Then we're going to share with you some of our more specific LGBTQ travel research, including some of the travel COVID related study. And then we'll finish up with some resources and ways to connect with us on going forward. So I'm going to turn it mostly over to Dave. I might chime in with a few comments, but I've spoken quite a lot and Dave's waiting his turn. So take it away, Dave.
All right, so I will start talking a little bit and just give you a little bit of background of what is the LGBTQ community. And for those that don't know, LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And the Q sometimes stands for queer and sometimes stands for questioning, but probably mostly stands for both. But I think the alphabet, as we often call it, really is a sign of how diverse the community is that we are not one community moving in the same direction. We are a bunch of different communities held together by something that we might call SOGI, or sexual orientation or gender identity minorities. So we are minorities. We are minorities in our sexual orientation, and we are minorities in our gender identity. And although we call it LGBTQ, it actually represents a much, much bigger group of letters that could be put onto the alphabet. But here's just an example of the many different sexual orientations and gender identities that our overall community does represent. I think one thing that's really important for LGBTQ is that we do not view sexual orientation or gender identity in the binary. So we don't view the world as our sexual orientation is either gay or straight, or man or woman. We view it as a spectrum. So I think that's really interesting. And if we look at gender, I mean, sometimes this surprises people, but if we just look at nature, gender identity is usually, I should say sex or gender is often defined by chromosomes, which traditionally is XX and XY, which are male and female chromosomes. But the reality is in nature, there are many different chromosome sets. Some people have XYY, some people have XXYY, some people have XXY. And although the majority of people are either XX or XY, there are quite a few people who are in that sort of middle range in the spectrum of gender. Same thing with sexual orientation is that you may have people that are only homosexual and some people who are only heterosexual. But you probably argue that the vast majority of the world is somewhere in between those definitions. So one thing to understand about our community is that we don't view sexual orientation or gender identity as just this binary of just two things, one or the other. We view it as a spectrum. And what I said earlier is that there's no singular LGBTQ traveler. So you may have some stereotypes of what a gay man is, or you may have a stereotype of what a lesbian is. And in fact, that stereotype does exist, whatever your feeling is. But the reality is that the vast majority of LGBTQ travelers will not fit your stereotype of who we are. And I think that's a hard thing to wrap your head around a little bit, is that we're such a diverse community. And, obviously, like a same-sex couple living in New York City with no kids and corporate jobs is very different than, say, a bisexual woman who's married to a trans man in Cape Town, or a lesbian couple who's retired in Mexico, or any kind of combination. Our gender and our age very much influences how we travel. And I think when we look at travel, sometimes our gender and our age actually can be bigger influences of our travel opportunities or preferences than being LGBTQ. So language matters in the LGBTQ community. And I think that's something you really need to start thinking about, is that how you present yourself, the language that you use on your websites and how maybe your staff talks, we pick up on these subtle clues. And it tells us a lot if you are trained as far as a diversity training, say within LGBTQ, and if it's a safe place for us. So for instance, you may see in different places in the world that this alphabet, how we define our community, is different from place to place. What I'm going to say is that's one thing that's even interesting for me and Tom, is that there's no one set definition to this community alphabet that we use. Some people call us LGBT, some people use us LGBTQ. But that's very United States, North American. As you go other parts of the world, you start to see adding the I for intersex, or IA for asexual and agender. And there are many, many variations around the world. Like in Canada, they add 2S for two-spirit, which is their indigenous native people in Canada. So you will see the alphabet change from country to country, and that's okay. But usually it starts with LGBT and then goes off from there, all right? Also say there's a big difference between sexual orientation and sexual preference. And that's a really good thing to wrap your head around. In the LGBT community, I did not decide to be gay. I pretty much knew I was gay from 5 or 6 years old. I just didn't know how to express it until I was a little bit later in life, in my adolescence. In the LGBT community, we view it as a sexual orientation, or in other words, about how we're born, how we're wired, how our brain's wired as far as our sexuality. People who are transgender will tell me the same thing, is that they may have been assigned male at birth, but they knew they were gender as being female. And as they grew older, that became stronger and stronger. It's how their brain was wired. So we very much view the world in the concept of sexual orientation. But if you use the word, say, sexual preference in the red here, that sends a message to us. It sends a message to us that maybe that you're using language that can be a little bit offensive to our community. And even though you might not understand that, it can be very off-putting to your guests. So having your staff really understand some of the language around LGBTQ community before you're welcoming us as travelers can be really important. So you don't want to use words like sexual preference or alternative lifestyle. I put it up there, GLBT, but GLBT is a word that was used a really, really long time ago, where gay men were put first in the alphabet. And then, I don't know, maybe about 15 years ago, there was the great lesbian revolt, always wondering why gay men were always first. And they, and as a group said the L should be first. And then eventually the gay men came around to that. And now you never see GLBT. And if you put GLBT out there, it actually sends a sign to people that you're a little bit behind the times, right? Also around marriage. I mean, it's really important that a lot of countries in the world allow same-sex couples to get married. Other places it's civil unions, and across Africa, most of Africa, not all of Africa, it's not legal, right? But how you refer to partners in a situation, I would say you should really mirror how I'm using my terms. So if I introduce the person next to me as my husband, you should also use the word husband. But I might introduce the person as partner, then you should also use the word partner, right? So listening to how I interact with, say, my significant other and the terms that I use is fair, and using the same word is good. I'd also say that there's some cautionary words, like say queer. Queer is one of these terms that's often used by younger LGBTQ people, often to reclaim a word that was used against us. But generally, in a professional setting, we don't use the word queer, and I wouldn't recommend it. Same thing with the word lifestyle. Like if you would say to me, "Do you live a gay lifestyle?" I would be like, what does that mean? I live a lifestyle that's very individual to me, but there is no such thing as a gay lifestyle because we're all across the board in our diversity. So anyway, there's a lot of pros and cons. I can go on. I could do a whole 30 minutes on this, but be careful. Language matters. And if you're doing diversity training, I would do some training with your staff around it.
Let me just touch on one before you move on, Dave. The term transgendered, as you see it in the not okay. The term transgender, of course, is perfectly okay. But when you add an ED to it, it sounds like it's past tense or it's an event that happened. And that is incorrect. So the proper term is transgender. Yes. Transgendered. No. Okay, move on, Dave.
All right. And what I want to say is that in travel and in life, LGBT people value safety, but the definition of safety is a little bit different in the LGBT community. And I'll let Tom talk a little bit more about what that means.
Sure. So when we ask questions about international travel, it's interesting to us to find out what are some of the barriers to international travel, or the concerns, you could say, not necessarily a barrier, but a concern that needs to be overcome. And you'll see that safety as a foreigner and LGBTQ laws, safety as an LGBTQ person, those rise right to the top. Things that you commonly think could be a barrier among the general population. How do I get a visa? What do I do with currency? How do I interact with people when I don't speak the language? Those really drop down because we are avid international travelers. We're experienced international travelers, and those hurdles really aren't much of an issue to us at this point, where they may be in the mainstream or the general population. So safety really is a concern. And I want to touch on what's going on in Africa, because I think it's something that needs to be addressed and considered as we discuss LGBTQ travel to Africa. Of course, I know some of you are outbound as well, and you'll learn a lot from that as well. Dave?
And Tom, I'm going to add on this, two other barriers that's become really extreme and are in the news is first of health concern barriers. And what you'll find when some of these other sort of epidemics hit, like SARS and such, LGBT people were first to bounce back because disease doesn't, in a sense, freak us out as much as LGBT safety. We're not so concerned about some of these, we can understand how to protect ourselves. So we can be a little bit less concerned about like urban crime and disease processes or epidemics. Not to say that we're not concerned about that, but I think we have a more realistic understanding of those kind of problems for travel. But what we are most concerned, as the slide show, is LGBTQ safety. So in some places in the world, it's just not safe for us to travel, and we're quite in tune with that.
So I wanted to point out something that I think was a pretty major event about a year ago when Botswana eliminated criminality for the LGBTQ community and same-sex relations. That may sound like no big deal, but it was a big deal. And we're starting to see other countries in Africa at least take that step away from criminalizing LGBTQ. Next. So you're in Africa, you're very familiar with this map, but I did want to just sort of highlight that as a motivation, South Africa, I mean, with same-sex marriage legal and LGBTQ rights written into the Constitution, that is so far in advance of many countries around the world, not to mention just in Africa. So South Africa really does have that advantage. As I mentioned, I stopped through Egypt and Ethiopia, and I've been to Tanzania. These are not known to be, or Morocco, known to be warmly LGBTQ welcoming countries. They don't treat their own citizens with equality and respect. And at the same time, I'm a big connoisseur of culture and experiences. So I kind of made a compromise to experience them, not spend a lot of time there, but to just sample it, to experience it. I wouldn't go with necessarily with a organized LGBTQ tour for an extended period in some of those countries, because there could be issues. And the last thing I want as a vacationer or on holiday is to experience issues of safety. So as a solo traveler, which I was in that case, my husband wasn't with me on those trips, I can get away with it. And I'm kind of fortunate in that way that I can get away with it, so to speak. So I'm mixed, obviously. You can see I'm a bit conflicted. You know, I visited very un-LGBTQ welcoming countries, but I did it quickly, and I did it with that more cultural priority in mind. So I think this map helps. I'm very happy to see Botswana in the gray now, as no recognition of same-sex couples, but no criminality of same-sex couples either. So that's kind of huge. And I think Africa really is changing. And I see a lot more opportunity for me to continue to explore Africa and along with others.
One thing I'll also say, there are LGBTQ tour operators that do small group travel to some countries that don't have legal protections. And I think one of the advantage of maybe using a group like that is that they've done their homework on the ground and they're using suppliers that are safe and supportive of the LGBTQ community. So to say that there are small group travel happening certainly to Africa from the LGBTQ community, but it tends to be from organizations that vet their suppliers very, very carefully.
Right, they do their homework. And I think that means a lot to the community when booking a tour like that it's explicitly stated, we've done our homework, we're staying in LGBTQ friendly hotels, our tour guide has been checked out. All of that makes a big difference. So we want to explore Africa. We just want to know that we're going to be safe one way or the other.
Now, a lot of these next slides have to do with corporations, but I want to say that you could change the word here and put country, and I think the same thing would matter here. So ultimately, the LGBT community is looking to be safe, and we're looking for corporations or countries that support LGBT equality, and we think that is more important than ever. So it matters. Your laws in your countries matter. We also tend to purchase from countries, and again, you could replace for countries that market to and support the LGBT community. And that's very much reinforced in the research, is that those countries are cities that outreach to the LGBTQ community do better with the travel. And I also want to say that it's not just about countries, it can be about locals. I think in the United States, that's really, really clear. In the United States, we have states or smaller jurisdictions that are very LGBTQ unfriendly, but they have cities within those states that are very LGBTQ friendly, and they're popular LGBTQ destinations. So sometimes we can look over the larger country or state jurisdiction laws when we know that an individual city is quite friendly to our community and quite friendly to its citizens that are also LGBTQ. I'd also say that Pride events are very important to the community. You know, it's been a tough year for Pride events all over the world as we've had to be shut down because of COVID, like many different types of events. But Pride is really important, and Pride is a good way, as long as it's a safe Pride and in an environment that supports Pride events, to drive tourism to your community. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about travel research and what defines us as far as demographics. So you might ask, why does the LGBT community get so much attention in the travel industry? First of all, we are a community where many parts of us have wealth. And this is a really difficult thing to talk about, because what I'm saying before is that we're very diverse. There are rich LGBTQ people and there are poor LGBTQ people. And not everyone, say, in the United States has the resources to travel to Africa. But within our community, there are good pockets of wealth and good pockets of what I'm going to call disposable income for travel. And I think that's disposable income is more important than wealth, is that because we are a community that is less likely to have children, although that's changing, we tend to have more discretionary income that we can use on a lot of different types of products, including travel. So I think one of the reasons LGBT people have really been seen as a really primary market for many countries and many cities is that we do have this sort of discretionary income that we can and we do use on travel. Travel is as a cultural value. So that's really interesting. When you think about LGBT, you think of us maybe as a sexual orientation or gender identity, but I'm also going to say that the LGBTQ community is a culture, and we have certain cultural values And travel has always been a really key cultural value within the LGBT community. We really value it. All right. Also, LGBT people are more likely to be mobile. So it's interesting. LGBT people tend not to live where they grew up. Now, this may be changing as it becomes more and more out and open for our community in different places in the world. But for many of us, me included, like I grew up in a rural community in Eastern United States. And when I was 18, I really had to get out because I wasn't supported. I came out as an LGBTQ person. I wasn't supported. And I headed to the big city like so many gay men of my generation did. But because of that, we're a little bit more mobile. We tend not to stay where we grew up. And because of that, it makes us more open to travel. You can target our community in cost-effective ways. So all across the world, there are LGBTQ media and organizations that can cost-effectively deliver your message specifically to LGBTQ people. As I said before, we are less likely to be parents, and that's one of the reasons we have more disposable income. But I also need to say that's changing, particularly in the lesbian or women's market. There are more and more LGBTQ families, but still, by and large, we're more likely not to have children, especially in the men's community. And also to say that we have higher education levels. Now, this one sometimes is controversial, but what happens is that I think when you're growing up LGBTQ, you realize that you may need to leave home. And one way you end up leaving home is by getting education or going off to university or different types of higher education levels. But research over and over does show that we often do have higher education levels. I also think that if you have higher education, you're more likely to come out. So this may be more of an indication that is if maybe you don't have a higher education, you're less likely to come out and you're less likely to end up being an out and open LGBTQ person. But that combination of higher education and being out and open as an LGBTQ person sort of goes hand in hand sometimes. And I'll let Tom talk a little bit about passports.
So yeah, every year we ask about whether the community carries a valid passport. And the reason this is very interesting to us and to our clients, especially those who are engaged in international travel, is that 77% of the LGBTQ survey respondents said, yes, they have a valid passport. If you compare that to the general population in the United States is more about 30%. And that's actually up from in the 20s when we first started asking this question, because now we need a passport to travel to Canada or Mexico, where we didn't before. But that said, we are avid international travelers. And we've used our passport in the past 12 months. We don't just get the passport and put it in our sock drawer and leave it there. We've used it. So it's not only that we have a valid passport, but that we get use out of that passport. And that I think is a big indicator of the appetite among the LGBTQ community for international travel. Of course, we all recognize that COVID has put a stop to international travel temporarily, but we'll see that there's a built up demand for travel, and international travel is going to be a big priority for the LGBTQ community as soon as we get beyond the COVID restrictions.
And I also want to say that, when we look at the question, like how important in your destination selection, I want to say is this concept of the destination being LGBT friendly is important, it's an important pot side. It's not important that it's an LGBTQ hotspot. Some people most of our community are not looking to go to like urban centers, to go to nightclubs and pride events. Most of us are just traveling to world to experience local culture. So it's more important that the destination is LGBTQ friendly than your destination is an LGBTQ hotspot. So if you don't have a strong LGBT local community, that can be okay, as long as you're known to be LGBTQ friendly. I also want to say that what our research will also show is that there is a gender difference between gay men and lesbians. And that generally gay men do tend to be a little bit more urban oriented in their destination selection, while the lesbian community tends to be a little bit more outdoor adventure oriented in their selection. Me and Tom are a little bit of probably outside the norm for gay men. We're outdoor adventure travelers, but we're a little bit more lesbian in our viewpoint of our travel selection. I also want to say that most destinations, when you look at what motivates you to travel, it's not, we travel for the same reasons that everyone else does. We travel for rest and relaxation and get away from everyday typical life and to explore new places. don't stereotype the LGBT community as only wanting to travel for, gay people traveling for gay reasons. It's just not the reality. Is that we're traveling just like everyone else is traveling. Is we're just trying to have an escape from our everyday work lives and get out there and see our countries or our worlds. When we're looking at urban travel, I want to say that restaurant and food has always been a big thing with the LGBT community. You may have a lot of historical sites, and maybe sometimes the LGBT community isn't really known for maybe visiting historical sites. But what I would say is that the research really shows is that we're really interested in your culture and history, and we're going to do all those tourism things that everyone else does, is visiting what your historical sites are. And we're going to check out the top attractions for your cities. So again, we're going to do those things that all travelers do, but also to say that we also want to explore interesting progressive neighborhoods and LGBT neighborhoods if you have it. And an outdoor adventure, we do everything that everyone else does, is we explore, beaches, and we hike, and we go to national parks, and historical and archaeological sites. We're doing all those kind of basic things that everybody is doing. That's far more important to us than the stereotypical LGBT travel scene, whatever that means. As Tom said, we did a bunch of research on COVID-19, and you can look at it. I mean, I think a lot of what our research showed is that, international travel came to a stop. So that's not really helpful to you right now, but it will return at some point. We also found that, again, car vacations, at least in the United States, became very, very popular. So people got off planes, but we did travel, but within a 6-hour car vacation sort of travel. And that's probably true across the world. That will change. But as Tom said, we asked how pent up is your desire to travel again? And something like, almost 70% of the people have extreme or moderate desire to travel again. And that's probably just building. So as soon as we get beyond this COVID-19, I think the flights and the doors open for us to travel. And one of the things that's happening in the United States is that people in our country have saved a lot of money in the last year because of this. We haven't had stuff to spend it on. So there's some savings for travel. Another question is, what are the most common ways that if a brand is LGBT friendly? And again, we can change this to country. And the biggest way in which we know that a country is LGBT supportive is the news, right? So what is happening in the news as far as positive or negative in your country? So Tom brought up the Botswana example. That's heard here in the United States. It's heard in the news that South Africa trends to be more LGBTQ friendly, both in their constitution. So remember that everything that happens in your news, either good or bad, like if there's a gay bashing or violence against LGBT people, that's going to be heard in our country, and we're going to react to it, right? So you need to pay attention to what's happening in their news, because it does send messages to us. And also when you have political laws and you start changing your laws against LGBTQ people, that's heard in the United States too, and it's important. And what I want to say is, and we're going to start finishing up here, is that this is something I think if you're a destination, but you can say company here, and it's just as important, is that this is a little exercise I think everyone should do in this room who thinks they might want to attract LGBTQ tourism. What we first say is that, we go to the exercise, what are your top, non-LGBT tourism assets that's a good fit for the LGBTQ community? So what I mean by that, as I said in the earlier slides, is that you should go through what historical sites, what are non-LGBT reasons someone should visit, say, your country, and you should list them out. And are they a good fit for the LGBT community? Some of them are good fits, some of them might not be a good fit, but think it out as far as some of the information that we gave in your research and what would be a good cultural fit. And then, are there LGBT specific tourism assets in your country or for your company? List them out. So example, you may have an LGBTQ community. You may have supportive laws for the LGBTQ community. You may have some vendors or suppliers or restaurants or community centers or bars and nightlife that's LGBTQ specific. Go to your local LGBT community and ask them, why should a gay person travel here, right? And they'll tell you, they'll tell you where they take their friends. So I think this is an exercise that's really important to go through. What a lot of our countries or cities have done is they actually asked and went to their local LGBTQ communities and asked to have some meetings with them. And they asked them, when your gay and lesbian friends come to this city, what do they do? What do they enjoy? and try to understand what are the non-LGBTQ and what are the LGBTQ specific assets that bring you to this destination. And then what also goes with that is, are there barriers? And the reality is that there may be barriers, being legal barriers, or there may be other types of cultural barriers why LGBT people might not want to come to your destination. Understand them and see if there's ways to getting around them. You could get around them by changing your laws, but as I said, some LGBT suppliers get around them by actually finding on the ground vendors that are LGBTQ friendly and making sure they're trained. So the reality, I know in a lot of countries, is that sometimes the LGBTQ laws are not very friendly, but LGBTQ people and all travelers are going to be traveling in a very safe way across the board. So just assuring that, how can you assure that even if your country does not have the most supportive or has neutral laws, and trying to work that out, because every place has barriers for LGBTQ traveler. How are you going to get around those barriers over time?
So one way to look at your planning is to look at the different markets. As Dave mentioned, for example, the lesbian community has a higher propensity of having kids. So maybe your destination or maybe your tour group is more focused on family travel. So look at the LGBTQ family market. Your demographics may skew older or younger. They might skew geographically. Take a look at those markets within LGBTQ and then match them to the different opportunities. We've talked about leisure travel first and foremost, but there are lots of aspects of travel that are still opportunities as well within LGBTQ. Like I said, friends and family travel. There's a big and, well, paused now, of course, but growing business travel, meetings, conferences. As I mentioned, I went to the IGLTA convention in Cape Town. So these are great ways to introduce LGBTQ people to your destination. And then you have to match those to the various outreach opportunities. Is it a print ad? Is it focused entirely on the internet? Is social media your approach? Influencers? Maybe having events or sponsoring events or getting involved in nonprofit organizations, NGOs. These are all various channels of communications that really need to be looked at when you're planning out your LGBTQ plans and budgets.
And you can get really, really specific. And what I mean by that is that with the state, at least in the United States, you really can target. For example, you could go to our website and you can pull down the Black LGBT community survey, and you can really understand Black people in the United States and their values and what they're looking for through that research. It's not a travel specific survey, but you can get a really good understanding. And then if you wanted to experiment, say, you could actually target like African-American, Black, LGBT community members living in the Atlanta area, because maybe there's a Delta direct flight for you. Or you could do the same in the New York area, because maybe there's a direct flight from New York. And you can really target LGBT people in little pockets, either the pockets because of their demographics or pockets because of their geography, and see if you could, move some business and test some of your ideas before you roll it out on a more national scale, which can be very expensive.
Great point, Dave. Thanks. So to follow up, we have some resources to share with you. First of all, if you're not yet a member of IGLTA, Loanne did a great introduction to the International LGBTQ+ Travel Association. It's a global family. Look, think of it that way, including LGBTQ and not LGBTQ people that really want to work together to make the world a more welcoming and friendly place for the LGBTQ community. So if you're not yet involved with IGLTA, I believe that's step number one. Other resources that we can share with you is our website. It's cmi.info, I-N-F-O. And you can download our community survey, our hospitality and tourism survey, the two COVID-related surveys. We also have a community consumer products, a health survey, auto ownership. Maybe these are relevant to your exact business. Maybe some of them aren't, but they're really good background information to help you understand the LGBTQ community from a research perspective. And as Dave mentioned, we just released our Black LGBTQ community survey, which I think you'll find very interesting and very informative as well. So please do take a look at that. That was a community collaboration with about 60 LGBTQ organizations, prides, media, influencers, etc., to help contribute to this effort. And it's available for free off our website, all of our studies that you find on our website. And if you're enjoying this training, we've curated about almost 20 short videos, about 20 minutes each on various topics. You can hear discussions about the transgender community, the Latinx community, the Black community, some corporate case studies, some destination case studies. I think you'll find it really great to click on there and just view there. It's free to view some of those videos. And if you'd like a copy of this presentation file or links to the various surveys that we've presented here, please just send me an email. It's the fastest way. Doesn't have to be long or elaborate. Just say, please send reports or as much as you'd like to tom@cmi.info, and we'll get you a reply back with all the links. So thanks once again to Africa Travel Week for hosting us. Thank you for having the diversity and inclusion track. Thank you for including LGBTQ in that track. We're happy to be part of this conversation and as always, supporting IGLTA's work and efforts around the world to open the world for LGBTQ travelers. Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Great presentation on the research. And thanks once again to everybody for participating.